There is a garden somewhere in this world. Perhaps you have seen it, or perhaps it exists only in the corner of your memory, in that quiet place where dreams and reality touch. In this garden, before the sun rises, before the world awakens to its chaos and noise, there is a man. His hands are weathered, stained with earth. His back is bent, not from defeat, but from years of careful attention. He does not hurry. He does not check his phone. He does not wonder if anyone is watching. He simply tends. And in that simple act, in the quiet, unremarkable discipline of showing up before dawn, day after day, season after season, he has built something extraordinary. Not overnight, not through luck or inheritance or some secret formula whispered in the darkness, but through the ancient, almost forgotten art of patient cultivation. This is not a story about money, though money will flow through it like water through soil. This is not a story about success, though success will bloom here like flowers in spring. This is a story about something deeper, something that our modern world has nearly lost in its feverish pursuit of instant gratification and viral fortune. This is a story about discipline, but not the discipline you think you know, not the harsh, militant, self-punishing discipline that tastes like ashes in your mouth, not the discipline that comes from fear or shame or the desperate need to prove yourself to ghosts. No, this is the discipline of the gardener, the discipline that understands seasons, the discipline that knows you cannot rush a seed or force a flower or demand that summer arrive before spring has done its quiet work beneath the surface. Why does this matter? Why should you, with your bills to pay, your dreams deferred, your midnight anxieties about money and meaning, care about a metaphorical garden and an imaginary gardener? Because you are standing at the edge of your own garden right now, whether you know it or not, whether you can see it or not, the soil of your life is waiting, the seeds of your wealth, not just financial wealth, but the wealth of character, of purpose, of legacy. Those seeds are already in your hands. The only question is, will you plant them? And having planted them, will you stay? Will you show up tomorrow morning when the magic has worn off and the rain is cold and no one is applauding? Will you show up next month when the soil still looks empty and your friends are posting their quick wins on social media? Will you show up next year when the world tells you you're foolish to keep watering something that hasn't bloomed yet? The wealthy gardener knows something that our culture has forgotten. He knows that there is no secret. There is no shortcut. There is no life hack or viral strategy that can replace the slow, sacred work of cultivation. He knows that wealth, true wealth, is not found, but grown, not seized, but nurtured, not achieved overnight, but earned in the accumulation of 1,000 unremarkable mornings. And yet, we resist this truth with everything in us. We live in an age of immediate answers. Google responds in microseconds. Amazon delivers tomorrow. Netflix streams now. Our brains have been rewired for instant gratification, our nervous systems hijacked by the dopamine machinery of modern life. We have forgotten how to wait. We have forgotten how to work without immediate reward. We have forgotten the psychology of patience, and so we suffer. We jump from strategy to strategy, opportunity to opportunity, dream to dream, always searching for the thing that will finally, magically, transform our lives. We buy courses, we follow gurus, we read books about the secrets of millionaires, and we grow frustrated, bitter, disillusioned when the promised transformation doesn't materialize. But here is what no one wants to tell you, what no viral video or motivational poster can capture. The transformation is not waiting for you at the end of some journey. The transformation is the journey. The wealth is not the harvest you one day reap. The wealth is who you become in the daily practice of tending your garden. This is the psychological truth at the heart of discipline. This is the financial wisdom hidden in plain sight. This is the philosophical insight that changes everything. You cannot separate the gardener from the garden. You cannot separate the practitioner from the practice. You cannot become wealthy by accident or by wish or by following someone else's map to someone else's destination. You become wealthy by becoming the kind of person who does wealthy things, not once, not when it's convenient, not when you feel inspired, but daily, rhythmically, sacredly, with the same quiet devotion that a gardener brings to the soil. Over the next 2 hours together, we will walk through this garden. We will kneel in the dirt and examine the roots. We will study the seasons and understand the cycles. We will confront the weeds, those internal obstacles, those psychological saboteurs, those ancient patterns that keep us from the harvest we claim to want. And we will discover, perhaps to our surprise, that the discipline required to build wealth is not some superhuman feat of willpower, but something far more accessible and far more profound. It is the natural expression of alignment, of knowing why you are here, of understanding that you are not just making money, but making meaning, of recognizing that every small choice, every daily action, every moment of resistance or surrender is either planting seeds or pulling them up. So let me ask you now, before we go any further, what is your garden? What are you cultivating, or failing to cultivate, in the hidden hours of your life? And more importantly, who are you becoming in the process? These are not rhetorical questions. These are the questions that will follow us through every act of this exploration, because the wealthy gardener is not someone else, somewhere else, in some other time. The wealthy gardener is you, or rather the you that is waiting on the other side of your own discipline. But first, we must go back to the beginning. We must understand where gardens come from and why human beings have always known, in our bones, in our myths, in our deepest psychologies, that there is something sacred about the act of cultivation. We must understand that before there were banks, before there were stock markets, before there were financial advisors and investment strategies, there were gardens. And in those gardens, our ancestors learned the fundamental laws of wealth that we have somehow, catastrophically, forgotten. The sun is about to rise on our garden. The air is cool. The earth is patient. And somewhere in the distance, you can hear the sound of a gate opening, footsteps approaching, hands reaching for tools that have been used 1,000 times before. The wealthy gardener is coming, and he is about to teach us everything. In the beginning, there was wilderness, not the romantic wilderness of vacation photos and nature documentaries, but the real wilderness, chaotic, indifferent, abundant in some places, and barren in others according to laws that seemed cruel and arbitrary. Our ancestors lived in this wilderness for hundreds of thousands of years, hunting and gathering, moving with the seasons, subject to forces they could not control. They were not poor in the way we think of poverty today. They had community. They had knowledge. They had the entire wild world as their domain. But they had no stability, no certainty, no way to plan for winter or prepare for drought or accumulate anything beyond what they could carry. And then, somewhere between 10 and 12,000 years ago, something extraordinary happened. Someone, somewhere, probably a woman, if anthropologists are correct, noticed something. She noticed that the seeds that fell in the disturbed soil near the camp grew more abundantly than the wild plants in the forest. She noticed that plants could be encouraged, patterns could be observed, nature could be partnered with, and in that observation, in that moment of attention and insight, agriculture was born, the garden was born, and with it, civilization itself. This is not a digression. This is the origin story of all wealth. Because what is wealth at its most fundamental level? Wealth is stored energy. Wealth is abundance made reliable. Wealth is the capacity to survive winter because you prepared during summer. And the garden, the literal physical garden, was humanity's first technology for creating wealth from discipline. Think about what this required. It required someone to resist the immediate temptation to eat every seed and instead plant some. It required someone to stay in one place instead of following the easy harvest. It required someone to break the ground, which is backbreaking work, in faith that months later there would be a return. It required someone to defend the growing plants from animals and other humans who would rather steal than plant. In other words, it required discipline. It required a complete rewiring of the human brain from immediate gratification to delayed gratification, from consumption to investment, from opportunism to strategy. The psychologist Walter Mischel would not conduct his famous marshmallow experiment for another 10,000 years, but the fundamental principle was the same: the capacity to delay gratification, to resist the immediate reward in favor of a larger future reward, is the single greatest predictor of every form of success: financial, professional, relational, psychological. And this capacity, this fundamentally human, but not automatically human capacity, was first developed in the garden. But let us bring this story closer. Let us make it personal. Let us meet the gardener whose story will illuminate our own. His name was William. William was not born wealthy. He was born in a small town that had seen better days, to parents who worked hard but never got ahead, who loved him but could not give him answers about money, about building, about how to escape the cycle of paycheck to paycheck survival. William grew up watching his father come home exhausted, watching his mother worry, watching opportunities pass by their family like clouds that rained on other people's houses. And like so many of us, William made a vow. He would be different. He would escape. He would build something. But William's 20s were a disaster. Oh, not dramatically so. He was not homeless or addicted or in jail. His disaster was quieter, more common, more insidious. He jumped from job to job, always convinced the next one would be better. He bought lottery tickets and dreamed of lucky breaks. He followed stock tips and cryptocurrency hype and multi-level marketing schemes. He was always looking for the shortcut, the inside track, the secret that successful people knew but weren't sharing. He read books about millionaires. He watched videos about passive income. He attended seminars where men in expensive suits promised that wealth was just one decision away. And he tried. God, how he tried. But nothing stuck. Nothing grew. He would have a burst of enthusiasm, a week of discipline, maybe even a month of following a plan. And then life would happen. An unexpected expense, a discouraging setback, a friend's invitation to do something more fun. And he would drift back to his old patterns, his old chaos, his old conviction that somewhere, somehow, there had to be an easier way. Does this sound familiar? Does this mirror echo your own face back at you? William's transformation did not begin with a book or a seminar or a motivational video. It began in the most unexpected place, his grandfather's garden. His grandfather, we'll call him Frank, was 83 years old, living alone in a modest house on the edge of town, and he spent every morning in his garden. Not because he had to, not because he was poor and needed the vegetables, but because the garden was his meditation, his practice, his way of staying connected to something real in a world that had become increasingly abstract and artificial. William visited out of obligation one summer weekend. His grandfather was old. Who knew how many summers were left? And in the course of that visit, something happened that would change the entire trajectory of William's life. He watched. He watched his grandfather move through the garden with careful attention, removing a weed here, adjusting a stake there, checking the soil moisture, talking softly to the plants like old friends. There was no rush, no frustration, no checking of the watch or glancing at the phone. Just presence, just the work itself, done well, done completely, done with a kind of love that William had never associated with work. And that night, over dinner, William made the mistake of complaining about his life, about how hard it was to get ahead, about how unfair the system was, about how people who succeeded must have had connections or luck or something he didn't have. His grandfather listened in silence, and then, in the way that old men sometimes do, he told William a story, not a lecture, not advice, a story. He told William about buying this house 45 years ago, when he and Frank's grandmother were young and poor and had 2 small children. The house was a wreck. The yard was a wasteland of weeds and junk, but it was cheap, and it was theirs. And Frank decided that every Saturday morning, before the sun got too hot, he would work in the yard. Not all at once, not with some grand plan, just one Saturday at a time, one project at a time, one improvement at a time. He cleared the junk. He built a fence. He brought in soil. He planted grass. He created flower beds. He started a vegetable garden. Year after year, Saturday after Saturday, the property transformed. Neighbors who had pitied them began to admire them. The house that had been the eyesore of the block became its crown jewel, and every summer they ate vegetables they had grown. Every fall they enjoyed flowers they had planted. Every winter they looked out at beauty they had created. "The thing is," Frank said, looking at William with eyes that had seen a lot of seasons, "people would visit and say things like, 'You're so lucky to have such a beautiful property.' Lucky, as if it fell from the sky, as if 45 years of Saturday mornings didn't exist, as if discipline was luck." He paused, letting that sit. "Your problem, William, is that you're looking for the harvest before you've planted the seeds. You want the garden without the gardening, and that's not how life works. That's not how wealth works. That's not how anything worth having works." William felt something break open in his chest, not in a dramatic way, not with tears or revelation, but quietly, like ice cracking, like the first thaw of spring. Because he knew in that moment that his grandfather was right. He knew that he had been living as if wealth was something external, something to be found or won or stumbled upon. He had never considered that wealth might be something he had to grow, patiently, over time, through the daily discipline of cultivation. That weekend, William asked if he could help in the garden. Frank handed him a hoe and pointed to a weedy corner. "Make that ready for planting," he said, "and I'll teach you something." William worked. It was harder than he expected. His back hurt, his hands blistered. The weeds seemed infinite, but there was something satisfying about it too, something honest. You pulled a weed, and it was gone. You cleared a section of ground, and you could see the progress. There was no ambiguity, no confusion, no wondering if you were doing it right. The work testified to itself. Over that summer, William returned every weekend. His grandfather taught him about soil composition and companion planting and the importance of timing. But more than that, more than the technical details, Frank taught William to see the garden as a mirror. Everything happening in the garden was also happening in life. Every principle of cultivation translated to psychology, to finance, to character. "You cannot rush a tomato," Frank would say. "You can fertilize it, water it, give it everything it needs, but you cannot make it ripen faster than it ripens. You have to trust the process. You have to do your part and then wait. That's patience, that's faith, that's discipline." Or, "See these weeds? They'll grow without any help. They're vigorous, aggressive, they'll take over if you let them. But the good plants, the plants you want, those require attention. Those require deliberate cultivation. That's life, William. The bad habits will grow wild. The good habits you have to cultivate. Or every garden has seasons. Spring is for planting. Summer is for growing. Fall is for harvesting. Winter is for rest and planning. If you try to harvest in spring, you'll destroy what's growing. If you try to plant in fall, you'll waste the seed. Timing matters. Patience matters. Understanding where you are in the cycle matters. These metaphors were not abstract to William. They were visceral, embodied, learned through sweat and sunburn, and the simple satisfaction of eating a meal made from vegetables he had helped to grow. The garden was teaching him what 1,000 business books could not, that wealth is biological, not mathematical. That discipline is not about willpower, but about alignment with natural law. That the psychology of success is the psychology of the gardener. present, patient, persistent. By the end of that summer, William had learned to plant, but more importantly, he had learned to tend. He had learned that the planting, the exciting beginning, the vision, the decision, that was only about 5% of the process. The other 95% was tending, showing up, watering, weeding, adjusting, protecting, waiting, believing in what was happening beneath the surface even when nothing was visible above it. And he began to wonder, what if I brought this to my finances? What if I treated my income like a garden? What if I planted seeds, investments, savings, skills, and then tended them with the same daily discipline my grandfather brought to his tomatoes? He had no idea if it would work. He had failed at so many strategies before. But something felt different this time. This wasn't a get-rich-quick scheme. This wasn't someone else's system. This was a fundamental law of reality, observed and practiced for 10,000 years, by billions of people, in gardens all over the world. And if it worked for gardens, maybe, just maybe, it would work for wealth. This is where our story truly begins. This is the origin, not in some boardroom or seminar or best-selling book, but in the soil, in the seasons, in the ancient and eternal practice of patient cultivation. The wealthy gardener was not born wealthy. He was not given some secret knowledge. He was simply willing to plant, to tend, and to trust the process that has created every harvest since the beginning of human civilization. And now we must follow him into the next phase of this journey. Now we must watch what happens when someone takes the discipline of the garden and applies it to the wilderness of modern finance. Now we must witness the conflict, the struggle, the internal battle between old patterns and new practices. Because planting is easy, tending is hard, and the weeds, oh, the weeds are always waiting. William returned to his life determined to change everything. He opened a savings account, something he had never managed to maintain. He set up automatic transfers. He read books about investing. He created a budget. He planted financial seeds with the confidence of someone who had just discovered a universal truth. The first week was euphoric. He felt like a different person. He felt like he had finally cracked the code. The second week was harder. The automatic transfer came out on a day when his account was lower than expected. He had to transfer money back. The budget didn't account for his friend's birthday dinner. The investment book was confusing and boring. The seeds he had planted seemed to be doing nothing. By the third week, William was already beginning to doubt. The old patterns were reasserting themselves. The old voice was whispering, "This isn't working. You're not good at this. This is taking too long. There has to be a better way." This is the conflict that destroys more financial gardens than any external obstacle. This is the psychological battlefield where discipline lives or dies. Not in the dramatic moments, not in the big decisions, but in the third week, when the novelty has worn off and the harvest is nowhere in sight, and every part of you is screaming to abandon this stupid idea and go back to the way things were. Let us pause here and understand what is happening in the brain. Let us make this psychological reality visible, because if you cannot see the enemy, you cannot defeat it. The human brain is wired for immediate reward. This is not a flaw. This is a feature that kept our ancestors alive. When you found food, you ate it immediately. You didn't save it for later. It would rot, or someone else would take it, or you'd be dead tomorrow anyway. Immediate gratification was survival. The dopamine hit you got from eating that food reinforced the behavior. Find food, eat food, feel good, repeat. But modern wealth requires the opposite. Modern wealth requires you to resist the immediate reward, to save instead of spend, to invest instead of consume, to plant instead of eat the seed. And every time you do this, every time you transfer money into savings instead of buying the thing you want, your primitive brain experiences it as a threat, as deprivation, as a violation of the laws that kept you alive for millions of years. This is why discipline feels so hard. You are not just fighting laziness or lack of willpower, you are fighting evolution itself. You are fighting millions of years of conditioning that says, take the reward now, because there might not be a later. The psychologist Roy Baumeister discovered something fascinating in his research on self-control. Discipline is not a personality trait, it is a resource. Like muscle strength, it can be depleted. Every time you resist a temptation, every time you make a hard choice, every time you force yourself to do something your brain doesn't want to do, you use up some of this resource. And when it's depleted, you fail. Not because you're weak, but because you're empty. This is why people who are perfectly disciplined at work come home and binge on junk food. This is why you can be strong all day and then break down at night. This is why William, after a week of perfect budgeting, would suddenly splurge on something unnecessary. He was running on willpower, and willpower is finite. But here is where the gardener's wisdom becomes crucial. Here is where the metaphor transforms from pretty language to practical psychology. The gardener does not rely on willpower. The gardener relies on ritual, on routine, on systems that bypass the need for constant decision-making. The gardener does not wake up every morning and decide whether to water the garden. The gardener waters the garden at the same time, in the same way, as a practice so ingrained that it requires no debate, no negotiation with the resistant parts of the self. This is the secret that William learned from his grandfather, though it would take him months to fully understand it. Discipline is not about forcing yourself to do hard things through sheer strength of will. Discipline is about creating conditions where the right things become automatic. William began to study himself the way his grandfather studied the garden. He noticed his patterns. He noticed that he spent money most recklessly when he was stressed or bored or lonely. He noticed that he checked investment accounts obsessively when the market was up and avoided them completely when the market was down. He noticed that he could maintain discipline for about 2 weeks before something in him would rebel and sabotage everything. These were not moral failures. These were data points. These were the weeds in his psychological garden. And like any weeds, they would keep returning unless he addressed the root system. So William did something radical. He stopped trying to be disciplined and started trying to design a life where discipline was unnecessary. He automated everything he could. The savings transfer happened automatically. The investment contribution happened automatically. He deleted shopping apps from his phone. He unsubscribed from marketing emails. He removed decision points, reduced temptations, created friction between his impulses and his actions. This worked, but only partially, because while he could engineer his external environment, he could not engineer away his internal experience. He could automate the transfer of money into savings, but he could not automate the feeling of deprivation that arose when he saw his checking account get smaller. He could delete shopping apps, but he could not delete the emotional hunger that made him want to shop in the first place. This is the deeper conflict. This is the battle that takes place beneath the surface, in the roots, in the dark soil of the unconscious mind. One night, about 3 months into his gardening experiment, William had a dream. In the dream, he was back in his grandfather's garden, but something was wrong. The plants were wilting. The soil was dry and cracked. And when he looked for his grandfather, he found him sitting in the shade, looking defeated. "Why aren't you watering?" William asked. "What's the point?" his grandfather said in the dream. "It's all going to die anyway. Everything dies. Everything ends. Why work so hard for something that won't last?" William woke up disturbed, because the voice in the dream, his grandfather's voice, was actually his own voice. It was the voice of his own doubt, his own fear, his own deep-seated belief that nothing he did would ever matter, that he was destined to fail, that people like him didn't get to have the garden. Where did this belief come from? William began to excavate his own history, the way his grandfather had excavated the hard-packed soil of a new bed. He remembered being 8 years old, excited about a school project, working on it for hours, so proud of what he had created. He remembered showing it to his father, who barely looked up from the TV and said, "That's nice," in a tone that meant, "I am too tired to care about your small triumphs." He remembered being 12, saving money from odd jobs to buy something he wanted, only to have his mother borrow it for groceries that month when money was tight. The money never came back. The message landed, "Your efforts don't matter. What you build can be taken. Don't bother." He remembered being 16, getting a B on a test he had studied hard for, while a classmate who hadn't studied at all got an A because he cheated. The message, the universe is unfair. Discipline is for suckers. These memories were not dramatic. No one had abused him. No one had meant to harm him. But the cumulative effect of 1,000 small disappointments, 1,000 moments of effort unrewarded, 1,000 experiences of the world being random and unjust, these had built a psychological framework that said, don't plant, don't invest, don't hope. You'll only be disappointed. This framework was the real weed. This belief system was what he had to uproot if the garden was ever going to flourish. And here we arrive at one of the most profound psychological truths about discipline. Your ability to maintain discipline in the external world is directly proportional to your ability to regulate your internal world. If your inner landscape is full of unexamined wounds, unprocessed fears, and unconscious beliefs about your own unworthiness, no amount of budgeting or planning or automation will save your garden. The weeds will always find a way back in. The psychologist Tara Brach talks about the trance of unworthiness, the unconscious belief held by millions of people that they are fundamentally not good enough, not deserving, not capable of the life they claim to want. This belief operates beneath conscious awareness. You don't think it, you assume it. It's the water you swim in, so ubiquitous that you don't even know it's there. And this belief will sabotage your discipline every time, because if you don't believe you deserve wealth, you will unconsciously find ways to prevent it. You'll overspend right before a breakthrough. You'll quit right before success. You'll snatch defeat from the jaws of victory in ways that seem like bad luck, but are actually unconscious self-sabotage. William realized he had to tend his internal garden as carefully as his external one. He had to pull the weeds of old beliefs. He had to fertilize the soil of self-worth. He had to protect the tender shoots of new identity from the harsh weather of old patterns. He began a practice of what psychologists call cognitive restructuring. Though he didn't know the term, he simply started noticing his thoughts the way his grandfather noticed weeds. When the thought arose, "This won't work," he would pause and ask, "Is that true? Or is that just the voice of an 8-year-old who got dismissed?" When the urge arose to spend money impulsively, he would pause and ask, "What am I actually hungry for right now? What am I trying to feed?" Most of the time, the answer was not the thing he wanted to buy. The answer was connection, or rest, or validation, or relief from anxiety. These were legitimate needs, but buying things wouldn't meet them. The discipline of the gardener was teaching him to identify the real need and find the real solution, rather than applying the wrong fix to the wrong problem. Slowly, painfully, inconsistently, William began to change. Not because he was disciplined, but because he was attentive. Not because he was strong, but because he was curious. He stopped beating himself up for failures and started studying them. What happened just before I broke the budget? What was I feeling? What was I avoiding? What deeper need was I trying to meet? The garden was teaching him that weeds are not the enemy. Weeds are information. Weeds show you where the soil is disturbed, where nutrients are imbalanced, where your attention has lapsed. In the financial garden, overspending was not a moral failure. It was a message from his psyche that something needed attention. 6 months into his practice, William hit his first real crisis. His car broke down. The repair was expensive, and every dollar he had saved, every seed he had carefully planted, had to be pulled up and spent on this unexpected emergency. He felt devastated. He felt like he was back at zero. He felt like the universe was confirming his worst belief: effort is pointless. But then something surprising happened. His grandfather called him, not knowing about the car, just his regular Sunday call, and William told him what happened. There was a long silence, and then Frank said something that William would remember for the rest of his life. "That's not failure, William. That's harvest. You planted, you tended, and when you needed it, the garden provided. That's exactly what it's supposed to do. Now you plant again." William felt something shift in his chest. His grandfather was right. The savings had worked exactly as intended. He hadn't had to go into debt. He hadn't had to panic. The garden had given him what he needed when he needed it, and yes, it meant starting over. But now he knew something he hadn't known before. The garden was real. The discipline worked. The seeds grew into something he could actually use. This was not the failure of his system. This was the validation of it. He started over. But this time, something was different. This time, he was not motivated by desperation or fantasy or the hope of some distant payoff. This time, he was motivated by the simple satisfaction of the practice itself. He had become, in some small but real way, a gardener. And gardeners don't garden for the sake of any single harvest. They garden because they are gardeners. It's who they are. The psychologist Angela Duckworth calls this grit, the combination of passion and perseverance for long-term goals. But grit is not, as people often think, about grinding through suffering. Grit is about identity. It's about who you believe you are. Gritty people don't persist because they're strong. They persist because quitting would violate their sense of self. William was becoming a person who saved, a person who invested, a person who tended his financial garden not because he had to, but because that's what his kind of person did. This identity shift was subtle, almost invisible, but it changed everything, because willpower could be depleted, but identity was renewable. Still, the battle was not over. Old patterns don't die easily. They hibernate, they wait, and they return, often when you least expect them, often in more sophisticated forms. A year into his practice, William's friend called with an opportunity, a sure thing, an investment that would triple his money in 6 months. All the old temptation came flooding back. The dream of the shortcut, the fantasy of the big win, the seductive promise that there was a way to skip all this slow, boring discipline and just leap to wealth. The gardener in him said no. But the gambler in him, the part of him that had bought lottery tickets and chased crypto hype and believed in magic, that part said, maybe this is different. Maybe this is the exception. He called his grandfather. He explained the opportunity, and Frank, in his quiet way, asked a simple question. Can you explain exactly how this investment generates returns? Can you see the mechanism? Can you touch the soil? William realized he couldn't. It was all abstract, all promises, all based on what someone else claimed. There was no garden here, just smoke. He declined the investment. His friend made the investment and lost everything. William's discipline had saved him not by making him rich, but by protecting what he had already grown. This is the battle in the garden. It is not fought once. It is not won permanently. It is a daily negotiation between the part of you that wants to take the shortcut and the part of you that knows there are no shortcuts, between the part of you that wants the harvest now and the part of you that is willing to wait for the right season. And here is the thing that William finally, fully understood. The battle was the practice. The conflict was the cultivation. Every time he chose the disciplined path over the impulsive one, he wasn't just saving money or building wealth. He was tending the most important garden of all, the garden of his character, his identity, his soul. Because in the end, the wealthy gardener is not wealthy because he has money. He is wealthy because he has become the kind of person who can create and maintain wealth. The money is just the fruit. The real harvest is who he had to become to grow it. But transformation is not complete until it is tested. and the ultimate test was still coming. 3 years into his practice, William sat in his grandfather's garden on a morning very different from that first summer. The garden looked the same, orderly, abundant, beautiful in that unpretentious way that only real things are beautiful. But William looked different. His hands were now also stained with earth. Though his garden was metaphorical, made of spreadsheets and investment accounts and budgets instead of tomatoes and roses, his back was also bent, not from age but from the repeated practice of tending, of showing up, of doing the work even when no one was watching. And for the first time in his life, William had wealth. Not absurd wealth, not yacht and mansion wealth, but real wealth. 6 months of expenses saved, investments that were growing steadily, debt paid off, a sense of groundedness and possibility that he had never known before. The kind of wealth that lets you sleep at night, the kind of wealth that gives you choices, the kind of wealth that isn't flashy, but is fundamentally, undeniably real. His grandfather was 86 now, moving more slowly, but still in the garden every morning. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, and then William asked the question that had been forming in him for months. "Frank, why did you wait so long to tell me all this? If you knew these principles, if you knew how the garden worked, why didn't you just tell me when I was younger?" His grandfather smiled, the way people smile when they've been waiting for a question. Would you have listened? Would 23-year-old William, desperate and scattered and convinced there had to be a secret, would he have heard what I'm sure I did tell him, probably a dozen times? William realized the answer was no. He wouldn't have heard. He couldn't have heard, because the teaching wasn't in the words. The teaching was in the practice. The transformation wasn't information received. It was attention given. The garden doesn't teach by telling, Frank continued. It teaches by showing. Every seed you plant either grows or doesn't. Every weed you ignore either spreads or doesn't. Every morning you skip, the garden shows you the consequence. It's honest in a way that humans often aren't. It doesn't judge you or pity you or lie to you. It just reflects back the quality of care you've given it. This was the insight. This was the breakthrough that William had been circling for 3 years. Discipline is not about controlling outcomes. Discipline is about tending causes. The gardener does not make the plant grow. The gardener creates conditions where growth is possible. The gardener removes obstacles. The gardener provides nutrients and water and protection. And then, and this is crucial, the gardener trusts the life force of the seed itself to do what seeds do. In his financial life, William had been doing exactly this, though he hadn't had words for it. He couldn't control the stock market. He couldn't control the economy. He couldn't control whether his investments went up or down on any given day, but he could control his contributions. He could control his spending. He could control his attention and his learning and his response to setbacks. He could control the quality of care he gave his financial garden. And in doing so, he had discovered something that changes everything. Wealth is not primarily about money. Wealth is about relationship, relationship with resources, relationship with time, relationship with yourself. The economist Sendil Mullainathan discovered something extraordinary in his research on scarcity. He found that poverty creates a scarcity mindset, a psychological state where your mind is so consumed by immediate needs that you lose the capacity for long-term thinking. Your bandwidth is hijacked. Your IQ effectively drops. You make worse decisions not because you're less intelligent, but because you're cognitively overwhelmed. But here's what Mullainathan also found. This isn't really about money. This is about margin. People with plenty of money can still operate from scarcity if they have no margin in their finances, no buffer, no space between what they have and what they need. And people with less money can operate from abundance if they have created margin, if they have a garden that provides, if they have tended their resources well enough that they're not living in constant crisis. William had discovered this personally. As his savings grew, as his investments compounded, as the garden of his wealth developed, he noticed that his thinking changed. He had mental space he hadn't had before. He could consider opportunities from a place of choice rather than desperation. He could weather minor emergencies without panic. He could be generous without resentment. The margin in his finances had created margin in his psyche. This is the psychological wealth that nobody talks about. This is the true harvest of discipline. Not just the money, but the mental freedom, the emotional stability, the capacity to be fully present in your life because you're not constantly, anxiously calculating whether you can afford to exist. But William's insight went even deeper because he began to notice something unexpected. The discipline he had learned in his financial garden was transforming other areas of his life. His relationships improved. Why? Because the same patience he brought to his investments, he began bringing to conflicts with his girlfriend. The same long-term thinking he brought to his budget, he began bringing to his career. The same attention to small daily practices he brought to his savings, he began bringing to his health, his creativity, his spiritual life. The psychologist James Clear writes about this in his work on atomic habits. Small changes in one area of life tend to cascade into other areas. Not because you're consciously trying to change everything, but because identity transformation is holistic. When you become the kind of person who does one difficult thing daily, you become the kind of person who can do difficult things. Period. William was experiencing what philosophers call virtue ethics, the idea that the goal of life is not to follow rules or maximize outcomes, but to become a certain kind of person. And paradoxically, when you focus on becoming rather than achieving, the achievements follow naturally, abundantly, almost inevitably. The wealthy gardener is not wealthy because he has mastered some complex financial strategy. He is wealthy because he has become a person of discipline, attention, patience, and care. And those qualities, once cultivated, produce abundance in every domain where they're applied. But the insight had one more layer, one more revelation that would complete William's transformation. 5 years into his practice, William's grandfather died. It was not sudden or unexpected. Frank was 88 and had lived a full, good life. But it hit William hard. The garden, the literal garden where everything had begun, now fell to William to tend. For weeks after the funeral, William couldn't bring himself to go there. The grief was too much. The garden felt too empty without the gardener. But eventually, the garden itself called him. The weeds were growing. The plants needed water. Life does not pause for death. William went. He pushed open the gate his grandfather had built decades ago. He walked the paths Frank had laid. He saw the beds they had planted together. And he began to cry. Not with despair, but with a strange, overwhelming gratitude. Because he understood, suddenly and completely, what his grandfather had really given him. It wasn't the technical knowledge of gardening. It wasn't the financial advice. It wasn't even the metaphor of the garden. What Frank had given him was continuity, legacy, the understanding that life is not about the individual harvest, but about the eternal cycle of planting and tending and harvesting and replanting. His grandfather had tended this garden for 45 years. William would tend it for perhaps 45 more. And someday, perhaps, he would pass it to someone else. The garden would outlive them all. The discipline would outlive them all. The practice would outlive them all. This is what true wealth means. True wealth is not what you accumulate for yourself. True wealth is what continues after you're gone. It's the practices you pass down. It's the wisdom you embody and transfer. It's the garden you plant knowing you may never see it reach full maturity, but that someone else will tend it after you, and the abundance will continue. The philosopher Alasdair MacIntyre wrote about practices, activities that have standards of excellence, that create goods internal to themselves, that connect us to traditions and communities, that extend across generations. Gardening is such a practice. And William realized, there in his grief and his gratitude, that he had been initiated into something far larger than personal finance. He had been initiated into the practice of cultivation itself, and this practice, this ancient, eternal, fundamentally human practice of tending and caring and patiently nurturing life, this was the real wealth. The money was secondary. The money was just one way this deeper wealth expressed itself. William began to tend his grandfather's garden, and as he did, he felt the full weight and beauty of what discipline really means. Discipline is not deprivation. Discipline is not grinding through suffering. Discipline is not white-knuckling your way to a goal. Discipline is devotion. Discipline is showing up for what matters, day after day, not because you have to, but because you love it enough to show up. Discipline is the practice of attention, of care, of relationship with something larger than your immediate desires. The neuroscientist Andrew Huberman has discovered that the brain's reward system can be retrained. You can learn to derive pleasure from the process rather than just the outcome. You can learn to feel good about doing the difficult thing, not in spite of its difficulty, but because of what that difficulty represents: growth, becoming, transformation. This is what had happened to William. He no longer needed external motivation to save money or invest or maintain his budget. These things were no longer chores to be endured on the way to some future payoff. They were expressions of who he was. They were his practice. They were his garden. And the act of tending brought its own satisfaction, its own joy, its own sense of rightness. He had become the wealthy gardener, not suddenly, not through some revelation or breakthrough, but slowly, imperceptibly, the way a seed becomes a plant, the way a practice becomes an identity, the way discipline becomes devotion. And standing there in his grandfather's garden, William understood the final truth. The garden is you. The wealth you're cultivating is not separate from you. It is not something you have. It is something you are. Every dollar saved is a choice reinforced. Every investment made is a belief strengthened. Every moment of patience is a capacity deepened. You cannot have a garden without becoming a gardener. You cannot build wealth without becoming wealthy. Not wealthy in money first, but wealthy in character, in discipline, in the ability to tend and wait and trust the process. This was the transformation that William's grandfather had always known would come, given enough time, given enough tending. Not a transformation of circumstance, though that would follow, but a transformation of identity, of consciousness, of relationship with life itself. The wealthy gardener stands in his garden not because the garden made him wealthy, but because he became the kind of person who could create and maintain a garden. And in becoming that person, wealth, in all its forms, became inevitable. And so we return to where we began, to the question that has been waiting beneath every word, every story, every insight we've explored together. What is your garden, and who are you becoming in it? Because this is not just William's story. This is the story of every human being who has ever tried to build something lasting in a world that worships speed. This is your story, whether you realize it yet or not. The seeds are in your hands right now. The soil of your life is waiting. The only question is, will you plant? Will you embrace the discipline of the gardener, not the harsh, joyless discipline of punishment, but the loving, patient discipline of cultivation? Will you show up tomorrow morning, and the morning after that, and the 1,000 mornings that follow, tending what you've planted even when no one is watching, even when the harvest seems impossibly distant, even when the weeds come back and the storms threaten and every voice in your head is telling you to quit? Because here is what I know, what William learned, what every gardener throughout history has discovered. The garden always rewards attention. Always. It may not reward it on your timeline. It may not reward it in exactly the way you expected, but faithful tending always produces harvest. The psychologist Carol Dweck discovered that people with a growth mindset, those who believe that abilities can be developed through dedication and hard work, dramatically outperform those with a fixed mindset, who believe that talent is innate and unchangeable. But a growth mindset is really just the gardener's mindset. It's the belief that you are not stuck with the garden you have. You can improve the soil. You can plant better seeds. You can tend more carefully. You can grow. This is not naive optimism. This is not positive thinking divorced from reality. This is the most profound realism there is, that your choices matter, that your attention shapes reality, that the quality of care you bring to your life determines the quality of life you live. Your financial garden is waiting. Start where you are. Start with a single automated transfer, a single dollar saved, a single decision to spend less than you earn. It doesn't have to be dramatic. Gardens are not built through dramatic gestures. They're built through quiet daily practice. Your professional garden is waiting. What skill could you cultivate 15 minutes a day? What relationship could you nurture with consistent attention? What project could you advance through patient, persistent effort? You don't need to see the whole path. You just need to take the next step, plant the next seed, water today's effort. Your personal garden is waiting. What habit would transform your health if you practiced it for a year? What creative dream is languishing for lack of consistent attention? What relationship is withering for lack of regular tending? The garden is always waiting. The soil never stops being ready to receive what you're willing to plant. But remember, you cannot force the harvest. You cannot rush the seasons. You cannot make a seed grow faster by pulling on the sprout. All you can do is create conditions. All you can do is tend. All you can do is show up with love and attention and patience, trusting that the same life force that has created every harvest since the beginning of time is also at work in your garden, in your life, in your wealth. There will be setbacks. Gardens always have setbacks. There will be storms and droughts and infestations. There will be seasons where nothing seems to grow. This is not failure. This is nature. This is the cycle. The wealthy gardener does not expect perfection. The wealthy gardener expects seasons and responds appropriately to each one. There will be comparison. You will see others' gardens and think yours is inadequate. You will see people who seem to have harvested abundance without planting, and you will be tempted to believe the universe is unfair. Don't let comparison steal your practice. Every garden is unique. Every soil is different. Your only competition is the person you were yesterday. Your only question is, am I tending better today than I did yesterday? There will be doubt. The voice that told William he was destined to fail, that voice lives in you too. It lives in all of us. It's the voice of every disappointment you've ever experienced, every dream that didn't come true, every effort that wasn't rewarded. That voice will tell you this won't work, that you're special in your inability to succeed, that discipline is for other people. That voice is a liar. That voice is not wisdom. It's wound. And like any weed, you don't have to destroy it completely. You just have to tend around it. You just have to keep planting, keep watering, keep showing up, until the voice of your practice becomes louder than the voice of your doubt. The wealthy gardener that William became, the wealthy gardener that his grandfather embodied, the wealthy gardener that has existed in every culture, in every time period, in every place where humans have cultivated anything of value. That gardener is not someone else. That gardener is who you are beneath the conditioning, beneath the wounds, beneath the fear and the hurry and the desperate seeking for shortcuts. You already know how to tend. You already know how to care for something over time. You've done it with friendships, with skills, with interests, with anything in your life that actually matters to you. The only difference is that you haven't yet fully applied this knowing to your wealth, to your abundance, to the material resources that could give you freedom and margin and the capacity to be generous. But you can start now, not tomorrow, not when you have more money or more time or more clarity. Now, with what you have, where you are. The garden doesn't judge the size of your first seed. The garden only responds to whether you plant it. And here is the final truth. the ultimate insight that transforms everything. The harvest you're creating is not just for you. Like Frank's garden became William's garden, your garden will one day be someone else's garden. The discipline you embody now becomes the inheritance you leave behind. The practices you establish now become the traditions others will follow. The wealth you grow now becomes the soil that future gardens will spring from. This is how human civilization advances, not through isolated individuals accumulating fortunes, but through practices passed down, wisdom embodied, disciplines transferred from one generation to the next. You are not just building your wealth. You are participating in something eternal. You are continuing the work of the first human who planted the first seed and waited through the first season to see what would grow. So tend well, tend faithfully, tend with love and patience and attention. Tend knowing that the harvest is certain, even when it's not visible. Tend knowing that you are not just growing money, but growing yourself into someone capable of stewarding abundance. The wealthy gardener is not wealthy because of what he has. The wealthy gardener is wealthy because of who he became in the daily practice of tending, and that becoming, that transformation of self through patient, loving attention to cultivation. That is the wealth that no market crash can touch, no inflation can erode, no circumstance can steal. Your garden is waiting, the gate is open, the tools are ready, and somewhere in the early morning light, before the world wakes to its hurry and its noise, there is a place for you, a garden with your name on it, a harvest with your signature. All that's left is to begin, to plant that first seed, to water it tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that, to become, one morning at a time, the person you were always meant to be, the wealthy gardener. Welcome to your garden, welcome to your practice, welcome to the slow, sacred work of cultivation that will transform not just your bank account, but your entire life. The soil is ready, the seasons are waiting, and the harvest, oh, the harvest is already growing, just beneath the surface, waiting for your faithful tending to bring it into the light. Begin today, tend tomorrow, trust always, and watch with patience and wonder as your garden becomes the evidence of your discipline, the testimony of your devotion, and the legacy of your love. The wealthy gardener's story is just beginning, and it begins with you.